Our first speaker today is Laurie Edmonds, CBE. Laurie had a distinguished career in the savings, pensions and broader insurance industry. He was deputy CEO of NPI, moved to Aegon as head of corporate development, and then embarks on a 15-year non-executive career in pensions, savings, and in public service. He serves as commissioner of the Financial Inclusion Committee, and in his spare time has also for over 18 years been trustee of a school for autistic children. One important fact about Laurie I should have mentioned earlier is that he has been one of the co-founders, indeed one of the driving forces of GAIN. So over to you, Laurie.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laurie Edmonds, as Alex says, an industry lifer. I've done most jobs I've been lucky enough to do, from filing through to company chair. But I am sort of coming towards the end of it, I guess. But having been a trustee of a school for autistic children for getting on for 20 years now, I realised, as our first tranche of children started to reach school leaving age, that there was a gap that existed beyond school leaving age, which is even worse than the issues that are faced by autistic children in particular during their school age. And that's what led indirectly to me getting involved with the other principles of GAIN. Our mission at GAIN is really very simple. We simply want to bring about a radical change in the employment prospects of neurodiverse people, not just autistic people, but dyslexic, ADHD, dyspraxic people in the insurance, investments and pensions and actuarial sectors of financial services. We started nearly 2 years ago, initially focused on autism, a particular issue being that provision for autistic people, which has improved sharply for children, drops sharply at 18, and only one autistic person in 6 ever gets full-time employment, when the considerable majority could. And very soon after we started our work, it became clear, first of all, how widespread the issue is. Secondly, that it applies to other forms of neurodiversity as well as autism. And thirdly, that it's as much of an issue for many people already in the industry as it is for people joining it. As we worked on this, we also realized that engendering a change on a business by business basis, which is how we started, was simply going to take forever. So that's why GAIN has been created. To test this idea, we had detailed discussions with more than 30 major businesses in the industry, and we got a strong consensus on 3 things. Well, first, there's a match, a crucial match, between the talent needs of the industry, especially, but not only, as the importance of data builds up and it's building exponentially, and the talents and capabilities of neurodiverse people. And that match is not generally being made. For example, only 1 in 6 autistic people, as I've said, ever get a full-time job, and there are many neurodiverse people already in the industry who think it's necessary to mask their differences when those differences should often be their strengths. Second, that the best way to correct this is with an industry initiative. And third, that the time to start addressing it is now. How to address it? Well, quite minor adjustments to things like employment interview and appraisal processes, and just recognizing that there are people who think differently can make a big difference to the benefit of the businesses, not just to the individuals. This is not a topic just aimed at CSR. Getting it right brings clear benefits which go straight to the bottom line. Experiences at businesses like JP Morgan and some of the insurance businesses who are already down this path, like Marsh, prove this. So what we're seeking at GAIN are these commercial, probably for the industry first, if the truth is known, the commercial, societal and economic benefits of the insurance and investment industry, of which I am so proud after all these years in it, but which is too often maligned and underappreciated, becoming pathfinders. We think that GAIN and the effort that comes from it can be an exemplar to other industries, where the insurance and related industries can give a real lead in a step change in the employment of neurodiverse people. GAIN itself is going to be a hub. It's going to be a place where individuals and organizations can find out more and find each other as well. Open to everyone in the insurance and related sectors, GAIN will raise awareness of how to unlock potential from neurodiversity. GAIN is not aiming to be a large organization. Our role will be to connect neurodiverse people with employers who need their talents and abilities, and enable links with service providers who can assist both, rather than building infrastructure to provide them ourselves. We've been working on this for almost exactly 2 years. We're delighted to say we've received support from a growing and influential group of founder funders. These include the ABI, Aviva, Zurich, Swiss Re, Principal Financial, Pensions Insurance Corporation, QBE, Underwrite Me, and Marsh. And that seed funding has enabled us to recently take on our very first full-time person, Vic Mazonas, as General Manager. Looking forward, in the summer, we'll launch a membership scheme, and we've developed 4 strands of membership. For businesses in the sector, where there'll be a number of options at different levels with different subscription rates. The more who join, the lower those rates can be. Then neurodiverse individuals will have a membership category, and for those, basic membership at least will be free. The third group of members will be providers of services to both neurodiverse people and employers who want to be more able to use the talents and abilities in our field. And final strand will be from researchers and academics who are interested in this field. We believe the time has come for the quite minor adjustments needed to be made in order to unlock the talents the industry needs. The coincidence of our build coming to fruition, just as the FCA is making a major push to improve diversity, is only one of the coincidences which underpins this belief, and why we're so pleased to have Georgina from the FCA to join us today. So I'd like to hand back to you, Alex, to introduce Georgina. Thank you.
Laurie, thank you so much for that excellent introduction. And I would to put Georgina's career in context. She started her career as an analyst in the city before embarking on an impressive path at a predecessor firm of the FCA, specialised in enforcement, and was by 2015 was the acting director for enforcement and market oversight, appointed COO in November 2015. Georgina was then appointed the senior advisor on public sector equality duty in January of last year. She combines this with being a member of the City of London Social Mobility Task Force. Over to you, Georgina.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much, Laurie. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about neurodiversity, an aspect of diversity and inclusion, which is gaining increasing attention and which we're learning to recognise not as a disability, but as a cognitive distinction in both senses of the word. So neurodiversity can be looked at not just as a D&I issue, but also as a business and transformation tool and asset. And more of that in a few minutes. But let me start by explaining why, as regulators, we, along with the Bank of England and the Prudential Regulation Authority, have an important role in promoting D&I in financial services. We have two starting points. Number one, the financial services sector is not diverse and inclusive. And number two, diversity and inclusion is a good thing for firms and for the consumers and markets they serve. Let me give you a few figures to demonstrate the first starting point, the lack of diversity in financial services. The latest update on the Parker Review, which recommended about 5 years ago that by the end of December 2021, all FTSE 100 companies should have appointed at least one ethnic minority member, shows that most of them have. 94 out of 100 have done that. Now, this is good news. However, most people of colour are in NED positions, and only 6 CEOs come from a minority ethnic background and only 3 chairs. In October 2021, Reuters analysed 21 major financial institutions and found that the major banks had made only a slight dent in their gender pay gaps since the previous year, while several insurers went backwards. And women in banking and finance calculate that at the present rates of progress, it will take 30 years to reach gender parity in financial services. Now, this lack of diversity must feed through into outcomes for consumers. For example, the Citizens' Advice Report on Discriminatory Pricing in Insurance, published on the 22nd of March, highlighted the risk of discrimination based on race and raises important and challenging questions for the insurance industry. And last month's report from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute looked at the provision of essential services, including financial services, for people with mental health problems. It found that only 29% of people with mental health problems say that essential service providers anticipate their needs. All of these facts and figures run counter to the literature, which says that D&I is a good thing for financial services firms and their customers and markets, that it can have beneficial business outcomes. Research demonstrates that diversity and inclusion can lead to better outcomes in risk management, to better conduct and therefore lower regulatory fines, to healthier working cultures and increased well-being, and to more creativity and innovation. It makes it easier to attract and retain talent. The diversity of thought that comes with demographic diversity and with true inclusion can lead to better decision-making, and decision-making that reflects the needs of different communities. All of that explains why we, together with the bank and the PRA, published our discussion paper on D&I in regulated firms last summer. We will publish a consultation paper this summer, which is another opportunity to join the conversation. And about 6 months after that, we'll publish a policy statement, which is the thing that sets out the new rules, requirements and guidance that we expect firms to abide by. Now, the outcomes that we want to see from this work are clear and simple. We do want to see more diverse representation in regulated firms, but not just for its own sake. This isn't a numbers game. Through inclusion and diversity of thought, we want to see the benefits of greater representation feed through into better consumer and market outcomes, into products and services which are designed for a diverse range of consumers and which reach them in a fair and accessible way. And we want to see better data collection and more transparency of data, because without the data, we are nothing when it comes to D&I. So our key message is that we take D&I seriously and we expect regulated firms to do the same. Ask yourself, if the proposals in our discussion paper were to make it into a new set of rules and guidance at the end of this year or the beginning of next, how ready would your firm be? We are well aware that as an employer, we're on a journey ourselves when it comes to diversity and inclusion. You can see it in our annual diversity report, you can see it in our ethnicity action plan, you can see it in our pay gap data. And that's why we started this conversation with a discussion paper, rather than going straight to consultation paper stage. We wanted a genuinely open conversation with as much time as possible for people to give us feedback. We don't have all the answers, but we are part of an ecosystem which can play an important role in driving positive change. And we have a statutory responsibility to get things right for consumers and markets. In this context, it's important to know that this drive for D&I in financial services hasn't come out of nowhere. It aligns with our long-standing work on treating customers fairly and on vulnerable consumers and fair pricing, and with our emerging work on the new consumer duty. And of course, as ESG rises up the agenda, it will take D&I with it. Now, you will have noticed that I haven't so far said anything specifically about neurodiversity, mainly because data on how neurodiverse financial services is in terms of management, employees or customers just isn't really there. Secondly, maybe also because neurodivergence is not specifically called out as a protected characteristic in the Equality Act 2010. This in itself raises D&I challenges. Some neurodivergent colleagues might recognise themselves in the definition of disability in the Equality Act, and some may not. The repercussions of this are that employers might not understand the application of the Act to neurodivergent colleagues, and those neurodivergent colleagues might feel that they don't belong to any particular group and might not feel included in any corporate initiatives aimed at the disabled, for example. And thirdly, maybe because neurodiversity can be invisible some or all of the time, or successfully masked some or all of the time. Despite or because of this, some of the feedback to RDP has urged us not to forget the importance of neurodiversity in financial services. Again, the figures speak for themselves, and Laurie touched on this in his remarks. ACAS figures say that about 1 in 7 people is neurodivergent, but neurodivergent people are one of the groups in society most likely to be unemployed or underemployed. ONS figures show that just 22% of autistic adults, for example, are in any kind of employment. This is doubly troubling because for many neurodivergent people, employment can be helpful by providing structure and purpose and social interaction. However, I think there are 3 reasons for optimism. The first is that there are good reasons to employ neurodivergent people. The second is that there are some very simple, low-cost things you can do to bring in and get the best from neurodivergent people. And the third is that the responses to RDP show that there is some really good D&I practice out there. On the first, those who employ neurodivergent people say that they are detail-oriented, analytical, good at pattern recognition and information processing. They thrive on predictability, they are tenacious and loyal. They can be great at innovation, systems thinking, and problem solving. This often leads people to conclude that neurodivergent people are therefore great for filling the STEM talent gap. But there are also great examples of neurodivergent people thriving in the creative industries, especially art, performing art, and music. And studies show that autistic professionals can be up to 140% more productive than the average employee when they are in a job that matches their skill sets and interests. The experience of EY, which has 300 people in 13 neurodiversity centres of excellence around the world, suggests that neurodiversity has added about $1 billion of value to its business through new solutions, media recognition and branding, stakeholder relations, and so on. And that millions of hours have been freed up through those new solutions. They have also found really high retention rates among neurodivergent colleagues, all of which is good for business. Now, Laurie also touched on talent. The Future Skills Report from the Financial Services Skills Council in March identifies 5 skills gaps for the industry: data analytics and insights, software development, creative thinking, data literacy, and coaching. And at the risk of stereotyping and pigeonholing neurodivergent colleagues, it is clear that they can make an important contribution to filling these skills gaps. On the second point about doing things to encourage and keep a neurodiverse workforce, forward-thinking organisations are looking at their employee lifestyle and making changes. And as Laurie said, sometimes these are minor adjustments and most of them are good for the neurodivergent and the neurotypical. Things like making it clear that neurodivergent people are welcome to apply for jobs, drafting job descriptions and interview questions so that they focus on essential skills, providing interview questions in advance so that you're testing knowledge and experience rather than the ability to make things up on the spot, hiring and training in small cohorts to create instant communities, pairing people up with an office buddy and a counsellor, providing reading materials in advance of meetings, appraising quality of work and outputs rather than more subjective things such as polish, and designing working environments with neurodiversity inclusion in mind, which is something that we did when we built our new offices in Stratford a few years ago. It must be clear to you that all of these things are good business practice, but they also require strong management and leadership. As leaders of a neurodiverse workforce, we'll need to be able to be clear and succinct about the purpose of our work. We need to run our meetings in a structured and inclusive way. We need to be prepared to receive honest and direct questions and feedback. And when we give feedback, we need to be succinct and intentional. We need to be prepared for leading people who might be quicker than us at finding solutions to complex problems. And neurotypical people need to be active allies, raising awareness, checking that policies, processes and systems are inclusive and that neurodiverse colleagues are involved in their design and maintenance, calling out bad behaviours and so on. On the third point about good practices, one of the joys of doing a discussion paper is that respondents sometimes use it as an opportunity to tell you about all the good things that they're already doing, which I welcome. And three things have really stuck in my memory from those responses. First, reverse mentoring. For example, a junior colleague who is neurodivergent can mentor a more senior colleague who is neurotypical as a way of sharing experiences. Secondly, shadow boards, where boards made up of more junior and more diverse colleagues contribute to board decisions, whether by attending board meetings or giving views on board papers. And third, getting the customer in the room, which is about literally or metaphorically getting customer views and experiences actively fed into strategic decisions about the design and delivery of products and services. And getting all of this right is particularly important in a challenging hybrid working environment. But the bottom line is that as leaders and as an industry, we need to create psychologically safe environments. This brings me neatly back to the unique role of regulators. The FCA is a conduct regulator, and as part of our long-standing work on culture in financial services firms, we have emphasised the importance of creating speak up, listen up cultures, of creating psychologically safe environments, because we recognise that these are important contributory factors when it comes to better outcomes for consumers of financial services. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing the other speakers and to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Georgina. That is tremendous. Tour de force. This is serious stuff, ladies and gentlemen, on the other end of this call. I'm going to be very brief now to hand over shortly to Catherine, who's going to view this from a different perspective. I'd just like to very quickly flash up on the screen 3 slides. We're not going to give you death by PowerPoint today. The first one, if you could, Lizelle, is just a very good demonstration. Can you make that the full screen? A very good demonstration. The line across the center of here is about the ability of neurotypical people, the line that goes straight across the middle, and the lines around it show the variances from that for neurodiverse people with different forms of neurodiversity. You can see that get the right match in the right place, as Georgina has said, and you've got a real bonus, up to 140% extra from neurodiverse people. We again have translated that, if you could put up the second slide, please, into a match between the kind of skills and abilities you get from people with various forms of neurodiversity into particular roles. And one of the things we're going to do at GAIN is make that kind of thinking available to people who become members and supporters of GAIN. And we've done the same thing, third slide please, Lizelle, for investment teams as well. I think they stand pretty much to order. Georgina has covered off the points brilliantly. And what I'd mainly like to do now is to hand over to Catherine Knowles, who's going to speak to us next. Catherine, who runs Cura Insurance and has, as it happens, just been helping out somebody from the public who's got in touch with us and said that they've been finding difficulty getting the right kind of cover for a member of their family who is neurodivergent, and Catherine has been sorting that out. That's an aspect of what we're going to try at GAIN. To be honest, we hadn't really thought of. But Catherine is a multi-award winning insurance advisor and is particularly known for her empathetic approach and continued work for fair access to insurance. So over to you, Catherine.
Hi, Laurie, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. So I think I'm mainly here for two kind of key parts, really. So the first one is myself as somebody who is neurodivergent and also as an employer, and to give a bit of a view of those different parts, really. So I was diagnosed as autistic last September at the age of 36. And it is something that I have masked incredibly well through my life. And the main thing I want to probably try and get across is the fact that, as with anything like this, we should never make assumptions. Now, obviously, I've got a very late diagnosis, so I've not had to handle many stigmas in terms of autism. And part of my autism is that I really struggle to accept praise and to internalize that kind of thing. So to actually list all the things that I've done and have done well at is quite hard for me to do. But it's very important in this kind of a situation to do that. So to obviously let people know a bit more about me. So as I say, I am autistic. I also have a doctorate in business management, specifically systems thinking, cybernetics and social networking. I have owned my own business for the last 10 years and we're not huge, but we've grown from about 11 people to 24 people. I also now have a second business too, where I'm training other people in our industry to be advisors and to hopefully do really good options for protection insurance. I am seen as a leader within the protection insurance space, especially for people with mental health and starting to get towards the neurodiversity side of things as well. But I work a lot with charities. I'm currently an ambassador for Parkinson's UK as well, because that is something close to my heart, because my dad has that. And I do lots of different things. As many people will know, if you're a business owner, you pretty much do anything and everything that needs to happen. But in my mind, with my autism, I started off in compliance. I am a compliance person. I will just put that out there. I know that it's always the fun part of our side of things. It works really, really well with my mind. I'm analytical, I'm systems thinking, I see processes, I sometimes see black and white, but I can remember a lot of what needs to be done and what can't be done. I was looking for the risks. And then that led me into being an insurance advisor as well. And probably going against quite a lot of the stereotypes that a lot of people would think. I am incredibly creative. I'm very artistic. And I do think outside of the box a lot. And also against a really big stereotype as well. With autism, it isn't necessarily that you are just not empathetic. You can also be too empathetic, and that is something that I struggle with. And it's something to maybe be aware of as well if you do have any colleagues that you know are autistic and they're maybe not seeming like themselves, especially during lockdown when they've been forced out of their regular routines. And then also in terms of world events, as an example, for me, I can't watch the news at the moment. I can absolutely read the news at times where I can monitor what I see and what I don't see. I cannot cope with seeing the pictures and the videos of things that are happening in the world at the moment. My visual memory is incredibly strong, and I go into what's known as catastrophic cycling with autism, where you can't get images or you can't get thoughts out of your head. And it's not having voices in your head or anything like that. It's just that you have so many neurons that are working that in a sense you can't shut down the process in the sense. In terms of being an employer, it's very interesting being an employer. And it kind of fits in. I do this the same for everybody and treat everybody the same for myself. And I have to say my team probably cursed me with this a little bit. But part of my autism that people may not always think about is that I'm incredibly sensitive to smell. Very, very much so. I was saying to somebody the other day as well this, because they're just like, oh yeah. I was like, well, actually, I'll tell you an example of why I'm so incredibly sensitive and how you'll know. I have 3 children, and my eldest was prone to ear infections when he was a baby, and I could smell his ear infections. So I would know I would have to take him to the GP because he had them. No one else could smell it. I'd literally be getting his ears and shoving them under other people's noses and they're going, can't you smell that? And I had no idea at the time that I was autistic, but I was like, something, you know, and I'd know. So we live at a seaside resort and I do ban fish and chips from the office. Nobody's happy about that. They do count down the days till I'm not in the office so they can have fish and chips for lunch. But what's lovely is that they all respect that. They know that it makes me feel incredibly ill. And I think having those open conversations, and I know obviously as the boss, it's kind of like I could just come in and dictate that. I have to say I have kind of dictated that, but I would do that for colleagues as well. You know, if someone said to me, I can't have this in here, well, then that's fine. You know, I can't cope with that kind of lighting over there. Okay, then can we move you somewhere else? There are so many things that we can do. I also have a number of people in my team who are neurodiverse. Different to me, they're not autistic. I have quite a few members of my team who are dyslexic, and they are absolute geniuses in their fields. They might not have got all your standard GCSEs, but in terms of graphic design, absolutely spot on. Computers, in the IT systems, have somebody who can read computer language better than the majority of us would possibly read English, but yet can't necessarily do the English side of things and how we would usually structure words and sentences. And so I think a big thing for me when we are looking at as employers is when we're setting up those CVs and what we need to see, we're saying to people, this is what I need for a job spec. Do we really need that? In some ways, you know, is it absolutely essential that we have people that need to have degrees or different things like that? And obviously degrees are lovely. I mean, I'm not going to knock them. I have myself, I've gone higher than that. And I think it's lovely. But is it really essential for the role that you're promoting? And in terms of the insurance industry and financial services as well, I do know someone personally who did try to enter our space, and they were dyslexic. Lovely, lovely person. And our exams are not set up to support someone with dyslexia, even if they are given the support structures that are deemed as suitable for people that are dyslexic. And there was a very, very clear problem there about helping people. And that's really difficult as an employer as well. If you take somebody on in that situation, you're trying to support them, but ultimately the exams, the qualifications and everything are just going to be unattainable. And that is something as an industry we need to work on. But as an employer, what I would always say is that I would hope that you would have some kind of a culture where people feel that they can come and speak to you. There's always this thing as well of people thinking, I think it's that scared of the unknown. You know, sort of, well, what's going to happen if I take on this person that's autistic? Well, they're probably incredibly productive and efficient and far more, they're going to get through things far quicker than someone who isn't in their special field. You know, we have to make sure that when we think of certain conditions, I think we kind of have an image in our mind when we think of a condition, and it's usually something that's being stereotyped by the media, by films, by TV. And what we need to do is be open and realize that isn't what everyone is who has that condition. With autism, there is an absolute scale of things, and it can be quite hard as well, I have to say, just I don't want to push time too much, but it can be quite hard as someone as well if you are recently diagnosed. So if someone is recently diagnosed, try and give them as much time and support to adjust to that. Because I was obviously, let's say it wasn't that long, I'm trying to think, it's 9 months ago now. And when I was diagnosed, obviously I'm a boss, And I was apologizing to everyone constantly. And I was just saying, I'm so sorry. If I've gone ahead if I've like jumped, I'm really sorry. You know, I've jumped trains of thought, you know, just forgive me, I'm autistic. And I just kept announcing it to everyone all the time with almost every conversation, because I was really paranoid all of a sudden that I was doing something odd, whereas I never felt that I was doing something odd. But in terms of my mind, I'm given a project, so I'll look at a management system. We're just talking about some of these before as well with Georgina and Laurie, is that I will look at a system and I very quickly see the patterns. I see the holes in patterns. I see holes in communication structures. So I will go off and very, very quickly down certain routes. And then everyone else is kind of looking at me just, sorry, how has she got there? What's gone on? And then I have to specifically think to myself, right, I need to go backwards and make sure that everyone catches up to me. And that's really hard to manage because it can almost seem a bit blunt. It can seem sometimes a bit rude, as if you're dismissing people. And it's making sure that you have good processes in place so that everyone involved, the people who are working with the person who's neurodiverse, they know what their manner is, what might happen if they suddenly start to have the symptoms, if they're in a certain mindset as they're going forward, and how to help them and not to take anything personally. And then also for the neurodiverse person to know how to best communicate with others. Because for me, I can do that. And at times I'll very quickly realize, oh, I need to go backwards. And then other times I can get a bit frustrated because people haven't seen what I've seen. And I think just having that really open communication with as many of the team as possible, depending upon how much the person wants to share, can be incredibly useful. I hope that's been helpful for everybody, and I'll pass back now because I think there's some question and answer times.
Thank you. Well, thanks ever so much, Catherine. That's amazing. The number of people who are late diagnosed that we've come across as we've been on this journey is really surprising. People who've done things like run the Institute of Directors, and I'm just suffering from a piece of Zoom cramp. That's why I'm jogging around. My leg just froze. It's normally my brain, but the people who run the Institute of Directors, the chairman of Lloyd's, it's astonishing how these things have happened. What we are really trying to do today, as well as spread the word, is to, being quite blunt about it, warm up some people who aren't currently supporters of GAIN to the possibility that they may be when we come to launch our structured membership scheme a bit later in the summer. So you have been warned if we do a bit of a follow-up, but we have had already some wonderful support from the founder firms that I've mentioned, and the best summary in a lot of ways of the view of the industry can be seen in this video from Yvonne Braun of the ABI, who are one of our founder funders. Lizelle.
Hello, my name is Yvonne Braun. I'm the ABI's executive sponsor for diversity and inclusion. Unemployment for people on the autistic spectrum is higher than for any other group in the UK. And that's not just a human tragedy, it's also an enormous economic and societal waste. Some employers are already embracing the unique talents that people on the autistic spectrum have for visual thinking and for attention to detail. For example, the German software company SAP and the Israeli army in their visual intelligence unit. But I think that we in insurance and long-term savings also stand to gain enormously if we embrace the unique talents of people on the autistic spectrum. From my personal experience, I know that people on that spectrum look at the world in a completely different way and think about the world in unconventional ways, which can really enrich your life and has enriched our family life enormously. Our sector has already made great strides on diversity and inclusion. And I think if we now focus also on neurodiversity, we really stand to benefit enormously. And that's why we at the ABI are absolutely delighted with the work of GAIN and are very, very happy to support them as they reach out to our members.
Well, thank you very, very much, Yvonne. Back to you now. I think, Alex, for the poll results and for some questions and answers from those who've been good enough to join.
Laurie, Catherine, Georgina, Yvonne, thank you so much for all of those contributions. And we'll start our Q&A session and conclude with our final poll, and we will be sharing the results of those polls with you. At the end, I will attempt to summarize the incredible rich content that we have learnt today from all our speakers. And just like to start with this question about neurodiversity being a subset of the broader diversity agenda. In the speaker's experience, like, what are the common aspects? What does neurodiversity share with other forms of diversity? What are the crucial differences? And Catherine, from your personal experience, you may well have highlighted a number of those.
I was going to say, I'm really sorry. My youngest has just come back, and we might hear a 4-year-old very loud. He has no volume control, so I apologise. So how neurodiversity differs to other conditions? Sorry, was that the question? Oh,
to other forms of diversity.
To other forms of diversity. I think with neurodiversity especially, it's not always visible. And it's not easy. And I think some people can think, well, what do you mean you can't understand that? I think there's a lot of stereotype that we're still getting through. And I think with a lot of other areas of diversity, such as race, gender, religion, sexual equality, the statistics, I think, are probably there for much more years than what we have with the neurodiversity, especially with neurodiversity being so underdiagnosed at times. And I think it's not as recognized. I think that it's a really, really difficult. Sorry, I've just got this noise in the background now. So I'll let someone else answer for a second while I just have a think.
Shall I cover for Catherine while she sorts out her noisy 4-year-old? I think Catherine is absolutely right. I mean, for me, there are two things that really stand out when you're talking about neurodiversity. One is, as Catherine has indicated when she talks about stereotypes and so on, there's no single type of neurodivergent person. I mean, there are a number of conditions, and within those conditions, there's a whole spectrum of ways that it might or might not manifest. So I think that's something that really marks out neurodiversity. And of course, you can be neurodivergent, and you can be a woman, and you can be Black, and you can be from a lower socioeconomic background, and you can be disabled. So there's that whole intersectionality piece comes into play as well. And I think the second thing is, building on Catherine's comments, that it's still a bit of a mystery and therefore a bit frightening to neurotypical people. We don't have the data. Laurie has given us some really good role models, but there aren't so many role models in this space as there are for other demographic characteristics. So it tends not to be talked about as much as gender, as much as ethnicity, which means in turn that it doesn't have all those structures around it that some of those protected characteristics have, such as strategies and policies and targets and all of that business. So I think those are the two main things for me.
I can't add to what Catherine and Chris and Georgina have said. I'd just like to pick up on Georgina's last point. It's precisely because there aren't the data and the understanding of neurodiversity that this really is an opportunity for our industry to take a lead. I'm almost inclined to put in brackets, for once, rather than following, sorry to let my biases show, particularly not be following the banks. It will be so nice to see the insurance industry in the lead.
And Laurie, on that point, without naming individual firms or practices as much as your conscience allows, can you give us some sort of good news examples of some great leadership that you've seen as you've gone around the industry?
Well, at the moment, for example, Aviva are running a really brilliant program for neurodiverse people, both entering and in the business. Legal in General, ditto, and Nest have taken up a program with Ambitious About Autism to introduce interns and give work experience to autistic people. Those two things, and there are very well established programs to help employers do this without a huge amount of money or expense. Very well established programs to help them do that. And the thing that's perhaps most struck me, particularly having been a trustee of Nest, with what happened there was when the programs were introduced, the beneficial effect, I know I'm repeating what you said here, Georgina, wasn't just to the people concerned, it was to their managers and to their colleagues. And it's that, particularly that early introduction, getting people into the workplace once is a huge step, even if it's for a fortnight or 3 weeks work experience.
Thanks for that. And to this point about about culture, and let us remember that we no longer talk just about diversity. We talk about diversity, and inclusion. I mean, starting maybe with Georgina, what do we think the limits of enforcement are, for an agenda like this, which, as we've all frankly discussed, cannot be measured at the moment. So enforcement on one hand versus genuinely creating and promoting inclusive cultures.
Sorry, it's been 2 years and I forgot to take off the mute button. But there you are. I'll get the hang of this eventually. I think enforcement and measurement can be viewed separately. They don't necessarily need to be viewed together. Because if we go along the argument that we can only enforce what we can measure, then we are narrowing ourselves, particularly when it comes to culture, particularly when it comes to inclusion, particularly when it comes to anything which is measured generally through qualitative rather than quantitative data. So I think that's a really important point. I think also that enforcement is only part of the picture. And you hope that you don't have to use formal enforcement tools as a regulator too often, because you have created a framework which fits most firms and which most firms are abiding with. And that is the rationale behind our discussion paper. What we hope is that all of the proposals in our discussion paper, when taken together, create a framework that's suitable for all firms, large and small, wholesale and retail, operating in banking, insurance, all of the areas of financial services. So we're creating a framework that other things will hang off, but a framework that's consistent across the industry and that encourages transparency, benchmarking, and all of those good things.
Yeah, I think in terms of things like the enforcement and the measurements, as you say, absolutely, I agree with Georgina, that's probably okay. But then at the same point, I think something that a lot of employers, as you said, there's this fear of what we don't know in a sense, but we all know that the rate of diagnosis for things like autism and other neurodiverse conditions is incredibly low. And there are so many later age diagnoses happening. And I think what firms need to realize is that, hiring somebody that is neurodiverse is not something that's it's not out there. It's not something that's, a thing, it's a barrier we're going to have to get over. They will be employing already neurodiverse people. They just don't know it. Yeah. And it's not a case of saying to all your team, right, we're going to get you all obviously tested or anything like that. But it's taking on board to say, well, actually, we've got an incredible group of people here. At least some of them will already be down, you know, on this route. How have we maybe changed the way that we've done something to support this person in their work role? And I think from there, you can probably start to maybe see things, maybe assume things. Sometimes we can pick these things up with people, and it can be an unsaid thing, because you don't want to, obviously, if they've not said anything, you've not said anything, you know, and it could just be something in the background. But there are so many opportunities. And I think as well, and I said this in a different talk that I did recently, is that you either are a culture that is inclusive and obviously it takes on board diversity, or you're not. You can't just pretend to be like this. It is absolutely at the heart of the managers that are in that company, in the structures, in how the recruitment processes are done, in how people's working life is. You know, it's a good example as well for neurodiversity, to say that for myself. I'm not saying I speak for everybody. I find trains incredibly difficult because of the amount of sensory overload. I also find traveling somewhere that I consider a distance very difficult on my own, just because of different things in terms of my life and in terms of the way my symptoms present themselves. But I'm very, very good at what I do. And do I need to travel to London? Do I need to travel to a city to do my job? Especially with everything that's happened in COVID world and everything. Why can't we allow more? It's the whole working from home piece. You know, it is for people who are, I know we think a lot about, you know, any kind of parents with a child who maybe doesn't want to travel much, people who just want that better standard of living because they're not traveling so much. Also, it's going to open up huge doors for people that are neurodiverse.
I'm going to not say anything at this point, Alex, because it's nearly past and I'm gagging to hear the results of those polls.
Lydia will now post the third poll at the same time she's collating the results from the other two polls. So and just as the poll results are being collated and analysed, I will quickly surmise the excellent contributions and content that we have heard today. And as someone who felt he knew a lot about this agenda, I have been astonished by how much I have personally learned. The shocking statistics around the wastage of human capital and potential have been reinforced today, but it's not just a negative news story. The examples, of everything that the FCA are doing, the impact that one leader can do, as Catherine has done in her workplace, as well as some of the best practices in the industry that Laurie, so lucidly explained earlier, really do give us a huge amount of hope, not to mention at least the outstanding contribution that EY cite as that neurodiverse people add to their agendas. And it's very clear that this is an agenda that is only going to be promoted by sort of passionate individuals in their workplace. So we really hope that everyone here will go away far better informed about their role and some of the ways in which they can help this agenda. And so thank you very much again for joining us. Thank you very much indeed for our speakers. And now Lydia is sharing the results of our polls. I don't think anybody would be overly surprised to say that the industry as it currently stands isn't necessarily set up to get the best out of neurodiverse people. Moving on to question 2, I think we can take heart that there is the vast majority of people work in businesses where there has been at least some recognition and actually, 60% say that some or increasing measures have been taken. And concluding with a whopping majority in support of an industry effort. We again, and per Ardua, look forward to working with you and continuing this conversation about how we can all be part of an industry effort in whatever form in the coming months and years. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And once again, indebted to our speakers. Thank you.